everyone, and welcome back to Liz Sews. In today's video, I'm going to be sewing together my Merida Inspired Bodysuit, and I'm really excited. I've been thinking in my head, I've spent a lot of sleepless nights sort of like going through the construction methods to figure out how it is I was going to put this together, and I think I've come up with some pretty good ideas to get me the look that I want for. So the first thing is the narrower trim came in, so I think I am going to go ahead and use this. If I compare it to the original trim I had here, you can see just how much of a huge difference that is in the width. I think this one looks a lot more wearable and not as sort of like comical or costumey, if you know what I mean. So the first thing I was thinking about is that this trim itself does not have a whole lot of like give side to side. So this is the bottom of my bell sleeve, and I think that if I'm careful, I can sort of like get away and ease in that sort of curve that goes along the bell sleeve, so that I have it an even distance from the bottom all the way across. It's like not perfect, but I think I can even it, ease it in so that you won't really notice there being any problem with it. But when it came to the neckline of the garment, I was a little bit more concerned. So sleeve. So here is the front neck of my garment. So I had a V-neck, which you saw me draft into the pattern, and then I'm splitting the V-neck even further down, and this section down here is where the lacing is going to be. So what I decided to do on here is sort of miter all of my corners, so have it come down this way, and then I'm going to miter the trim at that corner, come down again, across, then and up. And so I sort of drafted my own pattern for the trim itself. So you can see here's my original pattern, and then I drew in the sort of pattern for my trim, and I copied that over and cut it out. And so on all my mitered edges, gave myself 1/4 of an inch. So I have a little piece that goes down here. And then I'll have to sew this together with 1/4 of an inch stitch, and I have my 2 mitered pieces that are going to come up like this, and then another miter that'll go up like this. And I think that's going to be really good. So I'm going to apply the trim onto the velvet flat like this, and my idea is that I'm just going to carry this trim over into the shoulder seam and cut it off at the shoulder seam. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because, like I had mentioned, on the back, the neck is just too curvaceous for the trim to sort of like go around the back. I looked at it, and even with the narrower trim, there's just no way that I could get it like sort of curved around here and it looking nice, and I think it would be really hard to get it even. So I was not going to put any trim along the neck. So I kind of like want to save the trim only for areas that can be relatively straight, like that neckline. My next thought was to put it like down the back like a zipper, but I didn't love how that looked either. So I think I'm just going to keep it on the front neckline of the garment and the edges of the sleeves, and hopefully that gives me enough. So back to the front. As I had said, I want to make sure and apply the trim flat because I think that's going to be what makes it the easiest. But before I put my trim on, I was thinking, how am I going to finish this edge here? And I'm going to finish it with fold over elastic. And I think that it's easier to do the fold over elastic now than after the trim's going to be on, because like this section down here is going to do like a continuous placket, and I think if I have all that heavier jacquard trim sitting on there, it's going to be harder to sort of maneuver things under the machine. So step 1 is going to be fold over elastic. Now ideally I want the fold over elastic to be one continuous piece that goes around the back neckline and the front neckline, but because I'm doing the fold over elastic before I'm doing the sleeve seams, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a lot of excess on my elastic, and I'm going to start sewing it like down here. This length here is what I'm most worried about getting done with the trim on, so I'm going to go ahead and do the fold over elastic for this length, and then leave enough tail on the end so that I can eventually go ahead and do a continuous one around the neck once the whole piece is sewn together. So hopefully that makes sense. I had worked with this velvet a little bit last week, just kind of sewing around with it, and it is quite tricky to work with. I definitely was having a lot of problems with shifting or it moving under the presser foot, even though I have my walking foot on. That's just like the nature of velvet. So I am going to do my fold over in 2 passes, and the first pass is just going to be a basting stitch, getting that into place and situated where I think it needs to be. Okay, so the first pass of the fold over elastic is on. I just sort of stitch it into place with a long basting stitch along the edges here, and then, like I said, left enough elastic around the back that once the shoulder seam is in place, I can go ahead and do a continuous seam along the fold over elastic. So when I got to like these sort of corners, I sunk my needle and tried to like rotate the project without the elastic so that I can hopefully get these sort of turned corners. So now I'm going to go back and do the second pass with the zigzag stitch. You can see on the bottom of the slit here, I've just done it as if it was like a continuous placket, something like that. And then I'll zigzag stitch it once the elastic, so I'll fold the elastic in half and then zigzag stitch it for my second pass. Okay, so now the fold over elastic is done. I didn't do it all the way up to the end, just most of the way to the end. And you can see how that looks. So all I'm going to do now is sort of fold this in half. And at the very bottom of that deep V, I'm just going to do a straight stitch back and forth, sort of connecting the 2 corners of the fold over elastic. And that'll give me a much sharper like point in the center front. And once that's sewn in, it sort of gives you a much better point at the bottom there. I'm not going to worry about these sort of corners where the lacing is going to start up. I think that's fine. I mean, it looks, I don't know. I think when you wear it and you put tension on it, it'll look fine. Yeah. So now I am going to sew together all of my trim pieces. Of course, I designed them with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So that's what I'm going to sew those together with to get my neckline here. Okay, so here is the trim that I've gone ahead and sewn together with all those little mitered corners. So I sewed them together and then I sort of spread the seam allowance apart on each of the corners and then zigzagged over it to keep it sort of like flat. This does have some sort of like iron-on the back of it, but you know, velvet doesn't work the best with ironing, so I think I'm just going to try to attach it. First I was thinking I was going to attach it with hand stitches, but when I did the pattern for this, I made sure that I didn't need any vertical stretch, so I think I'm actually going to go ahead and just do like edge stitching on the trim to get it into place all the way around. So I think what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pin first, and I might find that pinning doesn't get it flat enough, so I might have to go in and use like a double-sided tape or something to get it to stay into place so that I can bring it over to the machine and edge stitch it. Okay, so now I'm going to take this over to the machine and sort of edge stitch along both sides to secure the trim in place all around this front neckline. Okay, so now the trim has been applied on. It's a little bit hard just because the velvet was like stretching along with it, and it looks kind of wobbly now, but I think it doesn't take very much tension to have it pulled out straight, so I'm hoping it'll be okay once it's on the body, that you won't notice that sort of wave. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. I am really liking how it looks with the velvet. I think it looks very regal and elegant, and I think it looks really cool. So now that that is all done, I'm going to sort of pin this excess fold over elastic out of the way so that I don't accidentally catch it in my seams. And I can go ahead and attach the back 2 panels on here. Actually, I'm going to sew the center seam on the back first and then attach it at my shoulders. So center back seam has been sewn on this garment, and now I can align it at the shoulders with my front, pin this into place, and then sew. This way, that trim along the front will be caught into the shoulder seam, so it'll end in a really nice finish, and then I don't have to worry about trying to curve that trim along the back. I think that's a good compromise for it. So now the shoulders are sewn together. I did go ahead and put a little bit of clear elastic stabilizer just in the shoulder seam because I'm not sure how it's going to hold up over time. And I might top stitch that down. But now that the neckline is all fully into place, I can go ahead with my fold over elastic that I left tails on the front and finish the rest of this neck hole edge to finish off the neckline. And then I have to sort of think about the sleeves. So here's what the shoulder seam looks like so once it's done. I did go ahead and put some stabilizer, some clear elastic stabilizer in the shoulder just because I wanted to make sure it didn't sort of bag out. So now that that is done, I'm gonna top stitch the seam allowance towards the back of the garment just to secure it. And then I can use my tails of fold over elastic that I have left over on the front to go ahead and finish the back neckline of this garment. Okay, so neckline and shoulders are now finished, and I'm liking how that's looking. So now I need to turn my eyes to the sleeves. I know in the mock-up that I did with this pattern, I set the sleeves in like a traditional woven garment, and for some reason I was thinking I was always going to set these in like a knit garment where you do it flat, but seeing how sort of wonky that arm side looks, I think I'm going to set it in like I did on the mock-up. So now, so I'm just going to do the two side seams of this, so turning it inside out, and I'm going to sew my two side seams together along here using sort of a stretch stitch and then finishing it with my overlocker. So now that the side seams are done, I'm really getting excited. I think it's starting to look very, very cool. But I'm going to set this aside for now and focus on the sleeves. For the sleeves, I think I'm going to do similarly to how I did the front, where I apply this trim on it as a flat pattern, and then I'm going to sew up the side seams so that way the ends of the trim are sort of like hidden in the seam allowance. And I'm not sure how to apply the trim. Like, I'm pretty sure I can get it to sort of bend around in that curve because it's a pretty gentle curve. I think what I'm going to do is take this over and, like, let me think. Am I going to finish the ends of this in fold over elastic, or am I going to turn it up? I'm going to probably finish the ends in fold over. So I think I'm going to measure up maybe 1 inch from the bottom and sort of mark that in. And I'll mark that in all along the back. And then I'm thinking I'll thread trace it so I can see it from the front of the garment, and that's going to be my like basis for where the bottom of this trim will go. So the thread tracing is done along the sleeve ends. I just use like a high contrast silk thread because the silk thread will pull out really easily once I'm finished with everything. But now I can just sort of use that as a baseline for where I need to put the bottom of the trim. And then it keeps me having like a consistent distance from the edge of the sleeve itself. So I have the first sleeve done. I actually found it a lot easier to not pin the trim down at all and just sort of hold it on and then move as I sew, trying to match the red basting line on the bottom. Now, in my original concept design, I had 2 rows of the trim, and I think I'm gonna skip it down to 1 just because it's already starting to get some wobbling in there, and as we go up the bell sleeve, that arc will have to be even more severe, so you'll get worse wobbling. So I think I'm just gonna stick with 1. I still think it looks really nice and gives that like effect of Merida's dress. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for the second sleeve. And then of course I can fold my sleeves in half and then sew up that side seam from the arm to the wrist. So here is the sleeve with that trim attached on, and then of course I've just done up that underarm seam down the length of the sleeve itself. So I like how that sort of finishes off the trim. I think it makes it look really nice in there versus applying the trim after the sleeve is sewn up. Certainly if I had this project to do over again, I would say try to pick a trim that matches the same properties as the fabric itself, because I'm definitely struggling with the fact that this is non-stretch, sort of like rigid trim against this very slinky, stretchy velvet. So that's something I would change if I had it over to do, but it's actually looking quite good, and it definitely gives me the effect that I wanted to go for. So before I attach my sleeve into the main of the garment, I think I'm going to go ahead and finish off the cuff ends here with just a little bit more of that black fold over elastic that I used along the neckline. Now the bottom of that sleeve is finished with fold over, and I'm really liking how that looks. So I lied a little bit, because as I was doing this, I was thinking it's probably going to be easier to finish the leg holes on the bodysuit now before I attach the sleeves, because when you're, working with fold over elastics, less material to sort of wrangle around is always better. So I actually went ahead and sewed the bottom of this gusset together where the front meets the back. Now this might be sort of an unpopular opinion or a hot take, but I don't love snaps in bodysuits. I find them really uncomfortable. I'd rather just have a sewn bottom and then take it off if I need to. So I've sewn the bottom on this. So I am going to, of course, finish these edges with fold over elastic, just like everything else. Fold over elastic is one of my favorite things to use on bodysuits, because I think it's nice. I don't have to worry about seam allowances, and it's nice and quick and easy. So finishing this with fold over, and then we ease in our sleeves. Okay, so the leg holes are now finished. So now we can do the sleeves. This might be another one of those unpopular opinions, but I really enjoy setting in sleeves. I find it super satisfying. So my big secret for setting in sleeves is just to use a lot of pins. So not very much of a secret. Okay, so the last step really is to just put the grommets in for the lacing. I tried the bodysuit on really fast, and I decided that I needed to have it open in the bottom here, just because the trim around the neckline made this neckline non-stretch, and it got a little bit hard to pull on. Like I could still get it on and off through the neckline, but because it was non-stretch, it was much harder than it should have been. And so I decided to cut the bottoms apart. So I cut at that seam line that I had put in there originally, and I just covered the ends of both sides with some twill tape, and then I can add some snaps into there so it'll still work just like before. So for the grommets, I do have these gold ones that I can put in, and they look to be a fairly good color match. At first I was thinking I wanted them in the velvet portion of the lace here, but I don't know about that. I think it might look a little weird. So I think I'm going to put them actually in the gold of the trim itself. Maybe like at those 4 spots, and then maybe just one in the velvet. Let's see. Maybe one in the velvet right at that point to keep it pulled in, but everything else to be in the gold trim. And I think that's going to be okay. So I'm going to use my rivet press for this. So the rivet press is something that, like, at the time I felt was kind of a frivolous purchase, but it's been nice to be able to just buy like new dies every time I want to try something new. So for this one, all I had to buy was the dies that go with the grommets. And of course, I used that on my corset last month to do all the grommets for the corset. I think there was 80. No, there's 44 grommets in the corset, and I would never have wanted to do that by hand. So I'm glad that I bought the rivet press, because it has come in useful for other projects down the road. So I am going to mark all of these into position like so. And then I might sort of rearrange the camera so you can see how I attach them with a rivet press. So the first thing I do is to get my awl. I like this tapered one because it allows me to get as big as I need to in the hole. And then I just pinned where I wanted to make all of my holes. So I kind of go through each one at a time. Go through the front and through the back. And then once I think that I kind of have the size that I want, I place the larger of the two on top of it and then try to work it through the hole. This is probably the most time-consuming portion of putting on these. So now that I got the larger section through into the fabric like this, then I take a washer and I set a washer onto my rivet press. And I set this guy onto my rivet press and press down. And then this is what it ends up looking out from the outside, and from the inside it's pretty smooth. So, and I've never had a problem with these coming off. So it feels pretty nice to have that two-part washer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of my neckline. And then while I have this out, I'm going to go ahead and do the snaps as well. So I have to set in some different dies. The snaps have two sets of dies, one for each side. So I got my rivet press from Gold Star Tools, and I got it several years ago. I will say that you have to kind of buy the dies from the same company that you buy your rivet press from, because they're not universal. So the dies themselves can be a little expensive. They're about $30 each. So it has to sort of like be worth it to you. But for me, I've actually put in a ton of snaps on clothing and bags and stuff like that. So for me, it's been worthwhile. And like I said, for the grommet presses, the tool to sort of like set the grommets by your hand, the pliers, was going to cost almost as much as the cost of a die, so I just got the die. So I'm going to do the tabs, so the feet, I'm going to do the male side first, which is going to go underneath. And I just like doing 3 snaps, so I'll do one on either side and then one in the center. So let's start with the center. Very similar to the grommets is I just make a hole. Let's see. I make a hole and then I put the post in, and then I put the second side of the snap on like that. And then I can take it over to my rivet press and set it in place. So now I have the 3 snaps attached to one side. I can go ahead and do the snaps on the other side. Like I said, I have to have a different set of dies for the other side of the snaps. So for this side, it's very similar to all the other ones we've been working with, where you just make a hole in your garment, then you shove the post through. Then I can take the second part of the snap, align it over top, take it over to my rivet press, and then that's what the snap looks like once it's put into place. Now all I need to do is lace it up. So the lacing is in. It's really more for decoration more than anything else, but I am pretty happy with how that's turned out. I hope everyone enjoyed coming along with me as I made my Merida Inspired Bodysuit. If you liked the video, be sure to click the like button down below. If you're interested in my future Disney inspired lingerie makes, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell so that you get notified every time I upload a new video. I'll see everyone next time. Take care.